Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Williams, and I am the Faculty Director of the Office of Black Church Studies and Assistant Professor of Theology and Black Church Studies here at Duke University School of Divinity. And tonight, I would like to welcome you to the third and final installment of our 2024-2025 Office of Black Church Studies virtual webinar. This year we've had three wonderful webinars, starting with Dr. Sarah Farmer of the Wabash Center, Dr. Jamal Hopkins from Baylor University, the Truett School of Theology, and tonight with the Dr. J. Paul Hines, who I will introduce momentarily. Tonight, we will have a dialogue between Minister Craig Glover Hines, who is the program coordinator of the Office of Black Church Studies here at Duke School of Divinity. Minister Hines works at the intersection of religion and sports, Christian mysticism, and carceral ministry. He is a 2023 graduate of the Duke Divinity School, and he is currently in his is about to begin his final year of doctoral studies here at Duke Divinity. He is a native of the state of Maryland, and he is very eager to engage Dr. Hines in debate. Not debate, Lord forgive me, in conversation tonight, as this is one of the areas that he that has captured his theological imagination. And so we're grateful to have him to lead this tonight. And then we have with us our very special guest is the Reverend J. Paul Hines, who is the Assistant Professor of Pastoral Theology at the Princeton Theological Seminary. He earned his Bachelor of Arts in Religion from the Felician College, then going on to earn his Master of Divinity and Master of Theology from Princeton Seminary, and his Doctorate of Philosophy and Religion with a Certificate of Psychoanalytic Studies from Emory University with a concentration in religious practice and practical theology. Before returning to Princeton, Reverend Dr. J. Paul Hines served as the Assistant Professor of Pastoral Care, Practical Theology, and Psychology of Religion at the Howard University School of Divinity. Tonight, we will talk, our debate will center around his most recent publication, A Gift Grows in the Ghetto, Reimagining the Spiritual Lives of Black Men. It was published by Westminster John Knox Press in 2022. After this exchange and this dialogue, Minister Craig Glover Hines will then he will establish protocols for further engagement and questions, and then we will create opportunity for those of you in the listening audience to be able to engage with our panelists tonight. So with no further ado, I decrease so that they may increase. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight, and lean in because this is gonna be a good one tonight. Thank you.
Dr. Williams, Reverend Crystal Berry, thank y'all so much for the Office of Black Church Studies for bringing us to this point, this third webinar series. Dr. J. Paul Hines, it is an honor, sir. I'm humbled to be in conversation with you on tonight. I'm very excited as your work was something that I was introduced to maybe about 2 years ago. I've enjoyed it very much, and I'm thankful to be in conversation with you on tonight, specifically about your book, A Gift Grows in the Ghetto, Reimagining the Spiritual Lives of Black Men. I think it is appropriate to begin by saying this, Dr. Hines. Less than 5 years ago, Black men accounted for 1.3% of the nation's 3.8 million public school teachers. According to a 2022 report, considering full-time college and university faculty in America, 3% were Black male. When writing on his experiences in seminary, Dr. James Cone lamented the fact that he went entirely through seminary without reading any Black theologians. You are not only a Black pastoral theologian and professor in the academy, but much of your work is dedicated to writing on the spiritual lives of Black men, a topic that is not a popular one in the theological world. You have written extensively on themes such as Black fatherhood, sonship, shame, sorrow, and several other challenging dynamics that present themselves in Black male life and faith. Can you speak to how this became your niche in academia and even more your vocational work in life?
Yes, well, thank you, Craig, and to Reverend Barry and Dr. Williams for the invitation to share with you tonight. The tracing one's vocation in terms of academic focus and what inspires one to devote, days and weeks and years to a specific topic is a very extensive conversation to have. But I think for me, to start the conversation off, I will start with a story that I start the book off with, which is the article written by the social critic Sylvia Wynter, which focuses on this theme of NHI, which she defines as no humans involved. She writes an essay after the LA race riots, and after the officers were acquitted, and Winters is trying to figure out, where were these people educated? Not their family background, but these are professional people, police officers, officials, governmental officials, who started to spread this acronym around during the riots, NHI. And she comes to the conclusion that a lot of this is spread and created in academia. The best and the brightest, the Ivy League institutions, the elite schools that some of us have been to or are still attending. The language about Black men, the language about Black people, the language about what goes on in the inner city. Do we really believe that human beings exist in these environments? In our church spaces, do we look at persons in inner city communities, even when some of them are filled with various congregations? Do we think humans are really there? And that made me think about my own background, where I grew up, and how there was really a disconnect between the church and the community. Even after people came in and got baptized and some served the church, there was still a sense that, because of where they lived, they weren't as human as other persons. And so the question that became for me, is it about the people or is it about the environment? Or is it about both? What kind of people really grow up or can grow up in the city or in the ghetto? What kind of challenges do they face? I begin to think about, what kind of relationships do they have? Because for me, Black spirituality is more than just religious practices or some kind of confessions of faith. It's really about relationships. Spirituality, for me, how I define the book, is about that relationship you have, even in a very hostile place, that allows you to develop and grow right in that space. I think for many of us who have grown up in certain neighborhoods or do ministry with persons in certain neighborhoods, it's always about the get out. When will it be over? When can I move to a better neighborhood? When can I have a better income? When can I go to some place where my kids can have a better education? And for a lot of people, that is not the opportunity they will ever have. Some people will live their lives in that space, in the wilderness, as I call it in the book. And how do they grow in that space? And the argument I make is, especially for Black men, because Black men have a hard time forming relationships, not because we don't want them, it's because the fear that people have of us, the images that have been put out about us, is that these are people we just can't relate to. And so how do we build the trust to form the relationships that we need right there in that wilderness, in that ghetto space? That's something I'm really trying to address in the text, and something that's been a concern of mine for a very long time. And I think, Craig, that growth that needs to happen to survive But also, I think what needs to happen is not just about survival, but it's about actual spiritual growth that can happen in that space. And what are the benefits of that growth? What can you share with others after you've experienced growth in that space? And so it means not just having a story for yourself, but there has to be a sense of generativity with these experiences. Are you creating space in that environment where other people can grow? Not just where you can survive and have your experience of having formed relationships, but what have you developed in that space that you can share with others afterwards? I think that's a real concern of mine, and that's what I'm trying to focus on some of the research that I do.
No, it's excellent. Throughout history, many studies have aimed to diagnose various issues that deeply threaten Black life in America, from the sociological, economic, political, and more. Yet, as you just stated, your project is unique in the sense that you have not chosen to ignore these dimensions at all, but you have chosen to address the gravity of them by looking at the spirit within
Yes.
Black men. You write, the gift is a theological answer to the current spiritual crisis afflicting Black men. Besides mental health and other factors, another significant contributor to the crisis is the absence of an awareness of one's gift.
Yeah.
Can you say a little about the deception of what you call giftless or
Yeah.
or gift?
Your giftlessness, which I think is a real danger. And this, I'll try to put in the simplest terms I can. Years ago, I came across a novel by the Russian novelist Dostoevsky called The Devils.
Hmm.
And in that novel, Dostoevsky, during a period of time in his life, was a political radical. This is still during Tsarist Russia, before the Russian October Revolution that took place in the early 20th century, where you had your Lenins and your Stalins and all that kind of stuff. This is before then. He's a political revolutionary. As he got older and got wiser, he started to reflect on, after all this revolution, what's left? After we burned down everything and turned the government over and taken everything over for ourselves, what's left? What do we do with the society that we have in our hands now? And so in the novel, he paints the picture of these figures who want to create a society in their own image. And he calls these persons giftless because their only vision for society is based upon themselves. They have no higher vision. They have no wider vision. And so for me, I think that for many men, the focus on the self and what you can accomplish or what you can do, but lacking a relationship that can sustain those accomplishments is a sign for me of giftlessness. There's no political movement that will ever be effective that's not built on relationships. There is no marriage that you can have that will ever be successful that is not based on sound relationships. And again, this is the gift for me. The gift are those relationships. That's the spirituality. You cannot parent without having a sound sense of how to have healthy relationships. It can't just be based on your own vision of how things can be, because you can't sustain it on your own. And this is very important for me for people who are having a wilderness experience or a ghetto experience. Because in those communities, you're set off from everything else. You often don't have access to resources that other people have in various different arenas. What can sustain you in those spaces again are those relationships. And what will destroy you, I argue, is this giftlessness, being so self-sufficient and self-focused that you don't know how to rely on somebody else. Now, this is completely against the way we've been taught about development in the West. Because in the West, it's about individuation. That's the mark of your development. It's always been. I have developed this self that I'm self-sustaining. I don't really need anybody else, whether it's economically or psychologically or socially. A lot of our religious lives, the language we use, I'm blessed. I've been saved. I have my relationship with God. But those relationships that sustain us in these places where we find ourselves, again, isolated from a wider community, in a space, again, necessarily where things aren't supposed to grow. That is something I really try to underscore in the work, right? Giftlessness is this complete inability to have healthy relationships, those kind of relationships that sustain us through these wilderness experiences that we have. So that for me, again, you want to change everything, that's great, but who are you going to do it with? And it can't just be based upon your own vision. There's larger political arguments about that, about how certain political movements have failed, when leaders have kind of based their vision for a new society based on their vision alone, not on what's good for the people, but what the leader believes is right. So it's a larger argument that I have about that. But in terms of Black men, it's two so it's like self-reliance out of control, or unrestrained self-reliance, I believe, leads to giftlessness, which I think is a danger not only to yourself, but the persons who are around you as well.
Incredible. Several of the things you just spoke to, I'm gonna return to it momentarily.
Sure.
Want to pay some attention to a excerpt from the book that's going to speak something to what you were just noting. But in his classic essay of our strivings, W.E.B.
Yeah.
asks, how does it feel to be a problem? I'm wondering if in your work, one of the things you are doing is encouraging Black men to imagine how does it feel to be a solution? If so, can you speak to the dire responsibilities and the critical awareness that is necessary here? I'm also thinking about what you mentioned in the first in your first answer. I'm thinking about the role that trust plays here. In Orlando Patterson's Slavery and Social Death, talks about one of the most overlooked and underestimated symptoms of the afterlife of slavery is the inability to trust. So can you talk also about, as Black men, how to also, along with that, those dire responsibilities and that critical awareness, ways to actually reimagine trust?
Patterson is an interesting figure because in some ways, some of his theories are being used by the Afro-pessimists nowadays, especially that his theory of social death. And he's inspired some people to talk about, the death-bound subject, this person because of slavery. And again, that the issue with him with slavery is, again, the isolation. He would say that these are people who are disconnected not only from their community, but completely disconnected from their history, and socially isolated, and socially dead. Now, I want to say this, Craig, that there is a theory of a psychosocial identity development. It was developed by a psychoanalyst called Eric Erikson. All right. Erikson has 8 stages to his model. Now, the first stage that he proposes is basic trust and mistrust. All right. This starts from an infant from birth to say the age of 2. Right. Now, none of us had extensive language skills during those years. None of us could really protest if we felt a parent was doing us wrong. We couldn't protest. We could cry and have fits and so on, but you can't tell your mother, at 10 months, articulate what's really going on. But this is the stage that Erickson argues that basic trust is established. Now, if you don't establish this basic trust, you can't go on and get the other positive elements of your development that Erickson says you need, which is some are competency, some have to do with identity later on in life during your teenage years, figuring out who I am, who am I? That's a developmental phase you have to reach. Intimacy, you either have intimacy or you're isolated. That has to do with trust. Or what about the end of life? You get older, you live your life, and you worked your job, you're retired now, and now maybe you're in your mid 60s, early 70s. Erickson says that during those years, you either face either despair or integrity. But none of this can happen unless you have this sense of basic trust. Now, I think that for many Black men, because, and this is really tied to something Patterson says, because we feel that nothing in our environment is able to grow, and we're surrounded by so much death, we have a hard time trusting not only ourselves, not only our parental caregivers or family caregivers, we have a hard time trusting our environment, right? We feel like the environment is against us. So one of the things that we have to do and try to find in this environment that can be hostile is what one theorist calls a secure base. Now, what is a secure base? It's like you can make an analogy to like the military. If you go out there and you're fighting a war, you need some place to retreat when things get hard. Now, unfortunately, for many Black men, they feel as though they had no place to retreat. They go out there in the environment every day. They go to school. They go to work. They even go to their church environment. And it's war all the time. Right? I'm fighting racism. I'm fighting trying to find an identity. I'm fighting trying to have some kind of economic viability. And when they come home, what do they find as well? And this is where the relationship thing is very important. Because if you're fighting wars all the time, all day, and you come home, you can't fight wars at home as well. Right? You need some place to retreat, some place to feel as though you're being cared for, some place where you feel somebody can receive the care you have to give. So where do you find these places of retreat? Where do you find the secure base? All right, this is where the trust needs to be established. And unfortunately, for many Black men, and this is, I would like to hear what people say about this. For many Black men that find themselves in relationships later on, their spouses end up having to do the repair work for what happened to them earlier in life in terms of their lack of trust. So the burden, unfortunately, oftentimes falls on Black women and their children to try to repair the trauma they experienced from that father's childhood or that husband's childhood. And you understand he's angry all the time and he's frustrated and he's isolated because he never had a secure base. He doesn't know what it means to come home and take a deep breath and feel at ease. He doesn't know how to be in conversation and tell somebody, you know what? He never had the chance. Remember, we're talking 0 to 2 now. You're already messed up if you haven't established that trust. So just like you were when you're an infant, back then I yelled, I pouted, I had tantrums, and that's what I'm doing now, right? Because I'm still trying to tell you, I need to learn to trust somebody. I'm trying to trust somebody. And this is the only way I know how to communicate, right? So it's a really deep phenomenon, Craig. But this is really what we're dealing with in terms of people who are 40, 50, 60 years old, but in terms of their psychosocial development, but are still infants in terms of how they know how to interact with their environment. So it's really, it's something that I think a lot of people don't understand. There's a reason for the behavior. It doesn't come out of, it doesn't come out of anywhere or nowhere.
Man, I'm thinking of so much that you just shared in that answer. What really jumped out to me is not having a place to retreat.
No, no, no.
And then you mentioned the absence of a secure base. I
Yeah,
feel
but
like,
hold on. Let me ask you this, Craig.
yeah.
And this is where the death-bound subject comes into play, and the pressures that we put, especially on some Black fathers who cannot meet the expectations, not only of society of what a man is supposed to be, but also of their sons. Nothing hurts a son more than seeing his father fail. Nothing hurts a son more than seeing his father have a slow death right in front of his eyes. And nothing hurts a father more than knowing that his son sees him as a failure. I'm going to say it again. Nothing hurts a father more than knowing his son sees him as a failure. And my example for this, anybody who's on this webinar, if you want to read about this, and I think the most poignant and profound account that I've ever read of this is Richard Wright's Black Boy. When Richard Wright was growing up on a plantation in Natchez, Mississippi, right? I'm just giving you an example of how devastating this can be for somebody for their whole life, not just their childhood, but they carry it around with them for their whole life. All right. Richard Wright grows up in Natchez, Mississippi. All right. Stable family growing up. Father, mother, grandparents. His father takes the risk. Takes the risk. I'm gonna move my family up to Memphis, right? Go to the city, try to get work. I'm tired of working on the plantation, and they had been sharecroppers for generations. He's gonna try to do something different. Moves the family to Memphis. And after a period of time, working menial jobs, Richard Wright tells the account that he's watching his father die before, not a natural death, but a spiritual death. His hope is leaving. His trust is waning. His ability to get up every morning and try again is waning. He's watching his father die, that kind of death right in front of his eyes. Okay. After a period of time, his father can't take it anymore. His father abandons the family, leaves Wright and his brother to be raised by his mother. And Richard Wright has some horrific experiences during his childhood. One time, his mother had severe health challenges, like a stroke, and she couldn't take care of the children, so she had to put them in an orphanage. And some people think he experienced sexual abuse while he was in the orphanage and all that. But the real issue was, once his father left, the hunger that he experienced. Now, there was hunger because they couldn't eat. But the hunger that was caused by the absence of his father, he could never get this out of his soul and his spirit. All right. Now, this is the real scary part, Craig. Years go by. The father has abandoned the family. He doesn't see the father. Right. He goes back because, again, nothing hurts a son more than seeing his father fail. He goes back to try to see his father 20 years later. All right. Hoping to see somebody who's changed a little bit now. Right. Now, do you know where he found his father when he returned to Natchez as an adult? Right back on that same plantation, still
My God.
sharecropping, still working the field, right? Now, after that, Richard Wright says his father is dead to him after that, right? Now, we could sit here and say, and it wouldn't be wrong, incorrect to state that what happened after that event severed the relationship between Richard Wright and his father Nathan Wright for the rest of their lives, which is true. Now, this is why I'm saying when you don't have basic trust, it distorts everything. There is a biography written on Richard Wright by his personal friend. Her name is Margaret Walker. It's called Demonic Genius. All right, and Walker was an accomplished writer in her own life. But she says Richard Wright never, listen to this, she said he never had one healthy relationship in his entire life. Not one, right? And it all stems from seeing that father fail and how that led him to mistrust his environment. Not just the father, but his environment. Because you got to think about it. He's wondering what could do this to my father. What could crush his hope? What could kill his ability to dream? And this is another thing, Craig, that people don't talk about. You're not going to see this in Black Boy. There's another biographer who talks about how Wright used to hear his father at night crying out to God to be called to the ministry. Because during that period of time when he was failing, right, failing his family, he figured, listen, if nothing else works, if God calls me to preach, at least I have something to fall back on. And God never called him. So listen to this. Richard Wright not only had a great distrust of his family and his environment, because he felt that God abandoned his father, he could never have faith in God as well. Right? So you talk about somebody who was absolutely giftless in every regard. I can't trust anything, right? Based upon my childhood and seeing how everything failed my father, right? So one of the things we don't talk about enough, Craig, I'm going on a rant here. One of the things that we don't talk about enough, Craig, is how we have to model what it means to be in a relationship to our sons and these men who we're trying to mentor, right? We have to model what it means to have these kind of spiritual relationships and to grow and to see us like I'm on the plantation, I'm changing things in some way, right? In some way, through this spiritual relationship, things are changing for the better. And when people don't see that, when you're talking about how much faith you have, how much spirituality you have, and how God is good to you, and that people see no growth, doesn't mean you're getting off the plantation, but something has to change.
Mm.
And he saw his father just as dead as he was when he was a
Mm.
boy. He was just as dead 20 years later. And that's what devastated him. And I think that's what a lot of people see, unfortunately. They don't see any kind of growth.
Dr. Hines, this is not even something that I prepped that I want to raise because of what
Sure.
you just said. I've held on to this, or felt like in some way like been hugged by this statement here that no matter how old a man gets, that man is still a son. And I'm thinking about, in what you just described, how the gift of sonship has sunk in so many men who are fathers.
Yeah. Yes. That's the problem. Yes. You're all father, no son. Um, and that's the biggest problem. And look, for some people to survive, that's what they have to do. You have listen, for some people, I'm gonna just put it as plain as I can. For some people, in order to survive and not like the trauma or the mourning overtake you, you have to kill the son within. You have to be the one to do that because you
Wow.
don't want to feel that anymore.
Mm,
Because there's a lot of vulnerability that goes with that.
yeah.
Because
Mm,
I mean, you could keep hoping somebody's gonna,
Jesus.
make you feel secure. You could keep hoping somebody's gonna, pat you on your back and say, you're doing a good job. But you could keep hoping that, somebody's gonna try to give you some kind of relationship where you can develop a healthier sense of self. You can keep hoping. And for some is the constant disappointment where you keep saying, I cannot allow myself to keep feeling like this. And so for many men, forget what other people do, they kill the son themselves. And then the danger is when you become a father, where is it?
Yes.
There's no connection.
Yeah.
Because I haven't written about this, but I'm thinking about, writing something about this because many men don't know that sons don't really need to connect with the father. The sons need to connect with another son. The son needs to connect with somebody who knows, you know what I'm going through. All
Yeah.
right. Now you've been there, but you still understand the processes that I'm going through.
Yes.
You still understand the grace that I need while I'm developing through these stages. You still understand what it means to need somebody, to be in the presence of somebody, right? That sometimes we don't need to talk, I don't need advice, I just need presence. Sometimes I just need, an affirming look. Sometimes I just need to look at you. I just need to know that you're there.
Yeah.
Sometimes I need to hear your voice.
Mhm.
So somebody who understands what it means to be a son. Now you can't do that if you spent the last 5 years of your life trying to develop this giftless self that is so self-sufficient that you don't. Listen, for some it works. I don't need this sonship in me because for some it makes them too weak. It makes them too vulnerable. But again, when you have that opportunity to have a son yourself. And it could be your own natural son. It could be a mentorship program. It could be a student that you've formed a relationship with. But there'll be a disconnect because you have no sonship left. And it's a hard thing to recreate once it's gone. So I think we need to build a culture around that where we honor it more and recognize that this is not something that you ever grow out of. It's never going to be gone. And you have to cherish it. And you have to always be sensitive to it. But it's hard to do though, to be honest with you.
Man, thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
You mentioned the wilderness and how that's a central theme in your work. You break down this meeting in the book historically,
Yeah.
geographically, along with its Hebrew symbolism.
Mhm.
I love what the quote you included from Dr. Walter Brueggemann, who said the
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
place where faith is not easy.
No, no, no.
So I'm wondering if you can talk to us about the wilderness. And I think you just already began to kind of do this in a way when you were really speaking to sonship, but I'm wondering, can you speak to the wilderness and its salvific role in Black male life?
Yeah, yeah,
It's a place that will, while it's dangerous and life-threatening,
yeah.
still a place full of the potential for supernatural activity, a place of redemption, a place of resurrection. And
Hmm.
why is the wilderness necessary for
Yeah.
in Black male life?
Well, I think it's necessary because for many Black men, that's their experience. Um, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. I mean, all the language about economic justice and social justice is going completely out the window now in this current political climate. But I think Brueggemann does a great job of highlighting that the wilderness is supposed to be a place of isolation. It's supposed to be a place, it's expected to be a place where nothing good grows. It's expected to be a place where one is supposed to be isolated from others, not only socially, but various other forms as well. Um, but that is a place where, see, I think that because many persons find themselves in this wilderness experience, and an issue I often raise, Craig, is that if you go into these wilderness experiences, one of the greatest dangers is you get pulled out before you learn what you're supposed to learn. The danger, now I teach pastoral theology, but in my work with psychoanalysis, I've always been impressed by how long psychoanalysis is. You know, psychoanalysis is not pastoral care where it's 1 or 2 sessions and you're done. So there are people who are in analysis for years or decades. And one of the things I admire about that is that I think one of the mistakes we make in our need, not our need, in our compassion for people sometimes to get them out of their wilderness experiences is that we pull them out way too early before they learn what they're supposed to learn. Because the thing is, if you don't learn the lesson you're supposed to learn, you're going to end up right back in that wilderness experience again. Now, there's nothing wrong going back in the wilderness, but at least if you go back and you learn your lesson the first time, you'll go back better equipped to deal with it the next time, right? All right, and many people don't get that. Now, what are the lessons you can learn, right? In the book, I try to highlight how Ishmael developed certain skills while he was in the wilderness. But forget the skills. The biggest thing that Ishmael had to learn, and this goes back to the previous issue we talked about with trust. Can you imagine how hurt he was when Abraham threw he and his mother out of the house, right? Now, I think it's established, and I think I point out in the book by Old Testament scholars, Ishmael wasn't an infant when Abraham threw him out of the house, right? He was a pretty developed young boy, and not a teenager. And that's the case. Abraham, being the father of that household, had developed a pretty strong relationship with Ishmael, right? But now he finds himself abandoned, right? You know how long it must have took taking Ishmael to develop trust, not just with his mother Hagar, but with God in a hostile place, right? How long that was? We're not talking days or weeks or months. I mean, maybe years to learn to trust again, right? And after you develop that trust, then we could teach you a skill. How do I survive in this environment, right? You know, then again, we're not going to the giftless route. We're going to the gifted route because think about this, Craig. He had to learn skills that helped him survive and helped his mother survive as well, right? To keep that relationship going, right? So this, whatever I get in the wilderness can never just be for me because I have other people that need my gift, right? It's not just about me. All right. Now, this is the part that people miss all the time. Yes, you're gifted, and yes, you're able to take care of others. You might not come out, but if when your time, see, this is the thing, when your gift is developed enough and you have enough trust in your gift, the gift is what takes you out the wilderness, not your own time, right? You just can't get up and decide, I think I've been here 5 years, I'm ready to go. No, 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 no. Is your gift developed enough to take you out the wilderness? That's the really important thing too, right? Because this is why I say this, Craig. Once you get out the wilderness and you believe you're gifted, that doesn't mean everybody's going to appreciate your gift. Everybody's not going to be shouting and dancing that Craig came out the wilderness. But when you're gifted, developed enough, you don't need that kind of affirmation, right? Because you already know, you have the experience to know what your gift can do. And it's not for everybody, right? If this gift can help not only Hagar, but somebody else, and maybe a handful of people, but that has to be good enough. That's what your gift is for. So you don't have to rush around saying, look what God did for me in the wilderness and be praised for everything. That's not what we're looking for. All right. We want a gift that we know that has been developed in relationship. It's not something I just made on my own in the wilderness. Right. And the reason I know that's the case is because when it was time for me to come out, the gift took me out. I didn't bring myself out. And if I have to go back in, this is the thing, Craig. If I have to go back in, I know I'm going in gifted, not by myself.
Oh, no.
And that's the really important thing, right? So I mean, there's a lot of lessons in this.
Incredible.
And again, these are I think things that, and this is the thing, Craig. This is not some newfangled thing. I think black people do this every day, right? Everyday people to survive in these environments. Look, we've been living in the inner cities for decades, right? And people have survived and thrived and grown in these environments. But we don't like those stories because we say, well, you're still there. God must not really be there. It's like the no human involved thing. Like, you're still there. What does that mean? No, people are still finding a way to maintain their relationships and grow in these environments. And this goes back to the earlier point you're trying to make related to the boys. The problem, there are answers in the inner city. There are answers in the ghetto. And this is Brookman's point about the wilderness. You just can't look at it as this desolate place where nothing grows.
Yeah.
There are stories there of people doing this every day. And we need to appreciate these stories and hear those stories. And I think that's something I'm trying to highlight in the book as well.
You're blessing us, Dr. Hines. Sir. I'm going to return back to minds momentarily. I want to encourage all of the listeners, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. I'm going to lift this one up. This is someone from the audience. Let me see. This is how does this idea of giftlessness translate or not to ideas of multicultural community tables in order to give voice to individuals at the table that traditionally have not been invited to the conversation? Is there a way, in your opinion, to have every race at the table without restraining anyone's perspective?
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, this is not an issue that I think just relates to the African American community or the Black community. I mean, this is an experience. To me, it's more of an experience than a geographical place. Now, of course, in the book, I'm talking about the inner city, but it's more of an experience. You could be in the wilderness and be in the suburbs. You could be in the wilderness and be in the most blessed place on earth in terms of landscape and all the physical beauty of the world, and still feel like you're in the wilderness. So, but yeah, of course, I think we need to share the stories of how different cultures encounter these things and the stories of how they overcome them. And I think again, we can't act like we have the only voice on what it means to live in diverse environments or to suffer racism or to suffer some kind of social injustice. Yeah, we need to be open to other stories, but and this is where the Afrocentric part of me comes out. We need to really, especially in these times, we really need to be aware of the stories that we possess and the power of those stories and how they have shaped us for centuries. Um, Toni Morrison, one of her last books that she published was called The Sources of Self-Regard, I think. And in there she has an essay about home. And she talks about Africa and how, of course, in the popular imagination, we think of Africa desolate, there's nothing there, lack of culture, backwards history, uh, unsophisticated religious practices, and all these kind of things. And she said she took on a lot of those stories herself, uh, given how Africa was talked about. But she also talked about how there were different stories that she heard about what it means to be Black in this country during her childhood, and how some of those stories are dying because the elders that used to be around that would share those stories all the time, and the spaces that used to be created to share those kind of cultural stories, they're no longer. And this is Toni Morrison talking about this decades ago. God knows it's way off now. We do need to go back to appreciating our own stories and our own history and narratives of how we've overcome, narratives of how we combat these systems of injustice that we face. Uh, and I think it's wrong to go into I mean, the metaphor of the table, to go to this table hearing everyone else's story where we don't know our own. We're not confident of the gift of our own story. So I think we have to try to build that up before we engage in this multicultural dialogue, to be honest.
No, that's excellent. When you were saying that several different contexts can serve as a wilderness location or
Oh,
wilderness,
definitely.
thinking about even when you were talking about how, man, it's your gift that brings you out, and if you have to go back,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
you at least have your gift.
Yes, yeah,
Thinking
yeah.
about even applying that to prison and brothers who ancestors who come home, some may return and some may not, but there's a brother here who's been participating in a class at a facility here in North Carolina, and he's talked about how when he first went as a 19-year-old, it was a place of suffering. And 23 years later, God has transformed that wilderness for him into a place of refuge. So he sees, the prison as a kind of place for supernatural activity where some manna has shaken down in his reality.
And guess what? Who am I to say that that's impossible? I can't be, you're still in prison. But that's a reaction, right? How can you're still in prison all these decades? How can that happen? Right? But for him, that's growth. That's growth. Um, and so I mean, I think we really have to expand what we mean when we talk about spirituality, what we mean when we talk about relationship. Is there a space anywhere that we can be where God can't be present? Right? That's a fundamental question, right? Is the ghetto too terrible for God to be there? I mean, I hate to think so. Is the prison is prison God can't be with somebody in the prison? I mean, but that's how we think, right? He can't be, how's God with him? He's still in prison, whatever the case may be. And again, Craig, it's not just again hearing the story, but see this thing, learning from it, right? He is not just a problem, right? If he tells his story, and it doesn't have to be to the masses, somebody needs to hear that story, right? Because even though somebody may not be in prison, they're having a prison-like experience. Even though somebody's not literally in the
Yeah.
wilderness, they're having a wilderness-like experience. And they're not, see, it's like the prison, they're not getting out. Not right now, right? And we don't know when. But they had to figure out I need to grow while I'm here. And I need to know it's possible. Like, I gotta lay out a plan and tell me every step I need to take. I just need to hear you tell me it's possible. That I'm not in here alone. And I think that's the fundamental thing that a lot of people need to hear.
Powerful, man. I want to raise this. When you say, is there any place we can be where God cannot be? The last 2 pages of the book, I was deeply moved when I read this from you, when you said you were talking about your frustrations with your pastoral counselor. And you said, well, my pastoral counselor, who I am sure meant no harm, failed to recognize that day was that it was not just my experiences of growing up in the ghetto that perturbed me, but that I myself had become a ghetto. Can you expound on that?
You know where that came from? The first person who wrote an academic book on the ghettos, a scholar called Lewis Worth, the white guy. Richard Wright, we bring him Wright again. Wright has some kind of knew Lewis Worth's wife. But anyway, and his book wasn't about the black ghetto that was starting to rise, because this was back, I think, 1920s or 30s when he wrote this book. Sociologist out of, I believe, University of Chicago, Lewis Worth. And he has a line in there somewhere. I don't know if I use in the book, but he basically says, he was writing about the Jewish ghettos back then in the United States. And he says, we can't focus too much on the geographical ghetto. We have to talk about how this becomes internalized. And so, yeah, for some of us, you get used to the isolation. You begin to celebrate it. You get used to the fact that, things, I'm not expected to be anything. That's the expectation, that death. And again, I'm not talking about physical death, but again, this sense that, there's no hope on the horizon, that things are going to get changed. And this is something this is a mark of my identity. This is what I'm supposed to do. A negative identity, as Erickson would say. And this becomes internalized. And again, what that does, Craig, and again, I'll say this as much as I can before the webinar is done. What that does, it hinders, and not altogether terminates your ability to have relationships, right? Because first of all, it's going to kill your self-esteem. Who wants to be in relationship with somebody who's internalized the ghetto, right? I can't be lovable. Look where I am, or look where I come from. All these different things that we begin to take on. So yeah, it's not just where you live, but what you internalize and what becomes a way of being in the world for you. So, and people on this webinar have heard this already, right? It's like even if you do get out, you carry the ghetto is with you no matter where you go, right? So you still can make a lot of money, live in a better house, drive a nice car, get married, have a great education, but that ghetto is still something that you've internalized so much that you can never be liberated from it. So having to reckon with that, and how do you overcome that kind of internalized, and it's really traumatic too. I'm not saying that it's something that you can get rid of overnight. It takes years. It takes a lot of trust building and healthy relationships to help you to deal with that and to overcome it. Because again, I don't think it's anything that you ever get out of yourself, but recognizing that that is not just a curse, that is also something that could lead to a lot of growth as well.
Yes.
Something you need to recognize.
Amazing. I want to raise two here, Dr. Hines. These are Q&A from the audience. The first one is, I think you may have spoken to this a little bit, but the Jewish community does this ritual that resembles much of what you are saying with regard to sons. Any significance to this for our community, Black boys and men, in a version that represents our traditions? So I'll let you speak to that one first, and then I'll.
No, we don't. Look, and this is really a problem with the African American community. We don't have rituals to honor this kind of sonship. And I don't know what that would look like. Um, I think particular families have their own thing, when that fathers do with their sons that are in the, based on individual family histories and so forth. But there's no larger rituals that we have to kind of mark the. And again, because I don't think we're not in a culture, and I'm talking about the wider Western culture that we're a part of, that really honors sonship. It honors the individuation that's supposed to come along. Now we honor fatherhood and what it represents, the paternalism and the patriarchy and the power and all that kind of stuff. Um, and another thing, Craig, I'll say this, and I touch on this in the book a little bit. We do have a model in the West that the father-son relationship is supposed to be based on rivalry and antagonism, not harmony and healthy relationality. And this is where I get to the Freud part and how I think that's completely something that we should break away from once we recognize we're heading in that direction. So yeah, we have to find out, what kind of rituals that we can create to kind of honor that sonship more than we do. And right now we don't, unfortunately.
Yes, sir. I love it. Here's another one, Dr. Hines. Your connection to Black men and the story of Ishmael is powerful in light of the multi-generational impacts. How do you see Ishmael's experience impacting Isaac and later on Jacob and Joseph, in which all three experienced their own form of wilderness? How do their combined stories speak to the experiences of Black men?
Yeah, there's a lot. First of all, I don't want to make it look like the Ishmael story is just a completely happy story, or the other biblical figures that were just raised. There's a lot of mess there. But I think that the connecting issue for me, and this goes from, you want to go from the old all the way to new to Jesus's traumatic relationship with the Father. I'm talking about the cross now, the abandonment of the cross that Jesus cried about. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the importance of the relationship. Think about this, Craig. The resurrection and people. How we talk about the resurrection sometimes is amazing. We have like Jesus just willed himself out the grave. And no, it was the relationship. The Father raised Jesus from the dead. The relationship raised Jesus from the dead. And his recognition that without that relationship, this suffering on the cross is for nothing. All right.
Yeah.
So it's that is a common thread throughout the scriptures for me. It really speaks to the power of spirituality. Again, it's not something that's so transcendent, but it's always being in connection and relationship with that thing that's transcendent. And that whatever happens, whether I stay in this grave or whether I get up, it's okay with me if I stay in relationship. That's the main thing. And that's the thing we have to hold on to. So I think that's the common theme throughout all those stories, right? The hope that's tied to relationship and the damnation that's tied to the sense that, I can get myself out the grave, or I can cause my own resurrection. I'm the source of my own blessedness, or I'm the source of my own identity. It can't be that way. I don't think we have see, I don't think Black men have the privilege to go about things that way. We need our relationships to survive. Maybe other people don't. I don't know. I know we do, in order
Yeah.
to survive.
Incredible. Man. Where are we? Dr. Hines, you've been saying so much, sir. I guess just as we are nearing our end, can you share hopes from the book that you hope readers get as you prepare maybe for a last word that you want to share with us? What whether it be for fathers, whether it be for brothers, whether it be
Yeah,
for husbands, friends, whether it be for mothers. I look at
yeah,
there was a lecture yesterday, Dr. Fentress Williams, and she, toward the end of her lecture, she talked about Hagar and Ishmael, and
mhm,
and encouraging us to think about the ongoing creativity and imagination around
mhm,
Scripture, how Scripture invites you into uh, thought worlds.
mhm,
So I'm thinking of, but she talked about how looking at Hagar, she wasn't someone that necessarily was going to benefit from the freedom that she carried. She was looking at, she says that but she was carrying freedom in
Mhm.
Ishmael.
Mhm.
So actually, what she bared was for what would come after her. I think about
Mhm.
what a word might be even for, those that may not recover their sonship. I don't know,
No, yeah,
may
no.
not recover
Yeah,
relationships of some kind, but potentially there's some kind of wilderness work or something that can
yeah,
produce some type of future hope.
yeah, yeah. Look, I'll say this, that a a powerful story that I tell once in a while about Martin Luther King Jr. is his someone may have heard about this or read about this, his kitchen table experience. During his early days as the face of the I don't know if it was even the SCLC back then, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He was becoming more of a public figure. He was away from Atlanta, away from his father, Daddy King. He was has his own family now. Was at Dexter, uh, pastor in a church, and had decided to join a movement to try to make the lives of all of us better in this country. And of course, he started to get the phone calls. He started to get the threats. I'm sure when it started, he probably thought, this is just people, upset for a moment. The stuff will calm down after a while, and things could get worse. He started calling his house and threatening them all, 24/7, getting death threats. And I don't know why this particular day somebody called and really upset him. He couldn't deal with it. And he has some kind of emotional breakdown over this. And Craig, we're talking about Martin Luther King Jr., right? Supposed to be this icon of faith, the strong man, strong leader. And as he tells the story, he says that he was having a crisis of faith because he could not be the leader that people needed, right? The threats were getting to him. He was starting to have doubts. He talks about, he starts praying, Lord, the people can't see me like this. Losing heart, I'm losing faith. And this is the moment I think a lot of people have to come to in terms of whether or not their sonship is going to be recovered, because it can be, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
He says that something stirred within him this sense that his father, who was a dominant figure, Daddy King, you read about him, you find out how just imposing he was, physically and otherwise. He could no longer go back to Daddy King for help at this moment, right? Daddy King couldn't ease the pain he was feeling. Now, I compare this to Ishmael in this sense. There had to be a moment for Ishmael in the wilderness where he recognized we can't go back to Abraham again.
Mhm.
Maybe ever. Right? The good life we were living there, the protection is, oh, we can't go back to Abraham. Martin Luther King Jr. had a moment like this. Prominent black father who's a great pastor in Atlanta. Financial means he could have went back to Atlanta and had been peaceful in that church, helping his father at that church. But he had to reach a point where he knew either the God that I've been preaching about is real, or this God that I've been preaching about is fake. I can't go back to Daddy King, right? So this is what I'm talking. I mean, the wilderness, not just King wasn't living in the ghetto, but he's at a point where he recognizes, right? I have no other resources, right? And guess what, Craig? The phone calls aren't stopping tomorrow, and the phone calls not stopping a week later, and the bomb threats and the attacks on his family, the verbal attacks, things are going to get worse, right? Now, he says at that moment, some voice came to him and affirmed, this way he says affirmed, this sense of sonship, right? That he can go on and fight for justice and do the cause, do the work of the Lord. And this is what he said, right, the reason I can do it. And again, this is not giftlessness. This is somebody who recognizes has a moment of absolute giftedness. I can do it because I'm not alone, right? I can go through this and it's going to get worse. And ultimately, I don't know if he knew it at the time, but towards the end of King's life, he knew he wasn't going to live a full life. He knew something was going to get him eventually, right? I know I can do this because I am not alone. But he only came to that moment when he recognized I have no other resources left. I could go back to daddy, right? But see, I can go back to daddy. I'll go back to daddy without my gift. Ishmael, you can go back to Abraham, but you go back to Abraham without your gift. Right? So we always have a choice, Craig. Nobody's going to force this on us. There's a choice we can make, but it's available when you have these moments, though. That's a really important thing.
Dr. Hines, this has been outstanding, sir. I'm so grateful for this conversation. It's theological applications, but to be honest, beyond that, it's and I believe maybe even for many on the call, it's personal applications.
Oh, I appreciate it. It's again something I've thought about for a long time, and again, this is stuff I try to live by some of this stuff day by day as best I can. And things I've seen, people who you think, oh, they're not doing nothing with their life, or they've wasted, squandered their lives away, or because of where they are, that they can't be examples of what it means to have a life of faith. I don't believe that. Sometime in the lowest places, in the worst places, you see the presence of the Lord, the presence of the Lord there, and
You,
having to recognize that thing is something we need to try to
yeah,
do a little bit more.
you saying or putting emphasis on that, not going back, it just, and you spoke to this earlier about the cross, and it's just, at least how I'm thinking about it, it's almost as if God's love for us is so complete that sometimes or modeled in the example of Jesus on the cross, crying out to his Father, but yet even through all of that, he didn't go back.
Yeah. I'm saying you
Didn't go
can't
back
go now. You can, but you're gonna let me again. You will go back without your gift,
to give.
and if you don't have your gift, you're hurting yourself. You're also hurting the people that you're going to encounter later on. And we don't know how many it could be. It could be five. It could be 5,000. But it will not be effective if you go and to have interactions of some relationship with these persons without the gift that you were supposed to get in that wilderness. That's the really thing.
I would ask if you have a last word, but I feel like that's a
No, no,
last.
that's not. I think I have that. No, no. I just hope somebody got something out of it. We tried our best.
Incredible, incredible. Um, for all our attendees tonight, Office of Black Church Studies, we're so grateful for your presence, your attendance, your participation in the Q&A. This was amazing on so many levels. I'm thankful for your work, your commitment, how you have said yes to your gift, Dr. Hines, and your work has fell into the hearts of people like myself. And thank you. And I just hope that all of us going forward can be um, inspired to keep our eyes fixed on the Son, who was the greatest demonstration of sonship. Um, and I'm sure on behalf of the Office of Black Church Studies, we thank you. I do want to just share two announcements with everyone present. Thank you for joining us for this final webinar on April 1st. Please join us for the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. lecture series, where we will have Dr. Cheryl Sanders of Howard University School of Divinity. She will be preaching in chapel that morning, and April 1st, and she will also be lecturing at 3 o'clock that day in the AMCR. Please join us for that final lecture of the school year. And I also just want to read a few lines here about a very wonderful opportunity for this upcoming summer. On July 19th through the 25th, the Office of Black Church Studies is sponsoring a week-long seminar on Black religious autobiography, exploring the autobiographical writings of Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Howard Thurman, Ida B. Wells, and other Black autobiographers and memoirists who use their life stories as weapons in the quest for freedom and humanization. Led by an instructional team of renowned scholars, this seminar will delve into the implications of these writings for vital leadership in Christian communities today. The seminar schedule includes morning prayer, plenary lectures, small group discussions, film screenings, personal journaling, and reflection time. There's no cost for the seminar. You only need to get to Durham, North Carolina. You can get more information about the seminar at the link that has been provided in the chat. I believe it's been provided in the chat. Perfect. Until next time, everyone, Dr. Hines, God bless you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you. Good night, everyone.